June 6, 1944. 0:20 hours. 2 miles inland from Sword Beach, Normandy. Obergefreiter Klaus Richter commanded a roadblock position covering the intersection that connected German coastal defenses to reinforcement routes from inland. His section had been on alert since midnight when reports of Allied parachute drops began arriving. Richter assumed the usual pattern. British paratroopers would drop scattered across the countryside, spend hours assembling, then attempt to disrupt German communications. His orders were straightforward: hold the intersection, prevent Allied forces from interdicting German reinforcements moving toward the beaches. The sound reached him first, a rushing of air that was neither aircraft engine nor artillery shell. Richter looked up, scanning the pre-dawn darkness, and saw shapes descending. Large shapes, far bigger than parachutes, gliding silently toward fields perhaps 400 yards from his position. Gliders. British airborne forces were landing nearby. Richter's section went to full alert. Gliders meant paratroopers, lightly armed infantry who would need time to organize after landing. If Richter's section moved quickly, they could engage the British while they were still vulnerable, disoriented from landing. He ordered his men forward, moving tactically toward the nearest landed glider, expecting to find British infantry unpacking equipment and assembling weapons. The glider was massive, larger than any Richter had seen previously. Its nose section lay open like a broken jaw, and something was moving inside. Richter heard an engine starting, a mechanical rumbling that made no sense. Gliders carried infantry, not vehicles, but the sound was unmistakable. Tracks moving, an engine accelerating. A tank rolled out of the glider's nose. A British light tank, perhaps 7 tons, painted in camouflage and moving with mechanical purpose directly toward Richter's position. The turret traversed, the gun elevated slightly, and Richter experienced a moment of pure cognitive dissonance. He was watching a tank that had just emerged from an aircraft. His section opened fire with rifles, pointless against armor, but reflexive response to impossible sight. The tank's machine gun responded immediately, forcing Richter's men to ground. Then the tank's main gun fired, the shell exploding against the roadblock's sandbag position. Richter's section scattered, abandoning the intersection, withdrawing in disorder. The intersection they'd been ordered to hold was now controlled by British armor that had arrived by air. Richter survived the war and was interviewed in 1968 about his Normandy experiences. When asked about his most shocking combat moment, his response was immediate. The flying tank. We'd trained to fight paratroopers, light infantry with minimal heavy weapons. We understood that threat. But we had no doctrine, no training, no mental preparation for armored vehicles arriving by glider. The psychological impact was profound. If the British could deliver tanks from the air, what else were they capable of? That uncertainty was more damaging than the tanks themselves, though the tanks were dangerous enough. The impossible concept. The idea of delivering tanks by air violated every assumption about airborne operations that existed in 1940s military doctrine. Airborne forces were light infantry, paratroopers, and glider-borne troops who traded heavy equipment for mobility and surprise. They couldn't bring armor, artillery, or substantial supplies. They operated until relieved by conventional ground forces or were destroyed. This was accepted tactical reality across all military forces. Britain's decision to develop air-deliverable tanks stemmed from operational problems encountered during earlier airborne operations. Paratroopers and glider troops could seize objectives through surprise, but struggled to hold them against armored counterattacks. Light infantry, with minimal anti-tank capability, faced German armor with limited options: hide, withdraw, or die. Providing airborne forces with their own armor would transform their defensive capability and allow them to exploit initial surprise more aggressively. The technical challenges were extraordinary. Aircraft of the period couldn't carry 7-ton vehicles internally in standard configurations. Existing gliders were too small and too fragile. Even if transport was possible, delivering tanks without damage seemed impossible. Parachute delivery would destroy the vehicle, and glider landing forces would likely damage delicate mechanical systems beyond repair. Every aspect of the concept appeared impractical. British engineering approached each problem systematically. If existing gliders couldn't carry tanks, design a glider that could. If standard tanks were too heavy, design lighter tanks optimized for airborne deployment. If landing forces would damage vehicles, design reinforced landing gear and shock absorption systems. The Hamilcar glider program and Tetrarch tank development proceeded in parallel, each designed to make the other viable. The Hamilcar glider emerged as the war's largest glider, 68 feet long, 110-foot wingspan, capable of carrying 17,000 pounds of cargo. The cargo bay was specifically designed to accommodate a tank: reinforced floor, wide loading ramp, sufficient internal space for a complete vehicle with crew. The glider could be towed by Halifax bombers and released over target areas, gliding silently to landing zones with precision that powered aircraft couldn't match. The Tetrarch light tank was optimized for airborne deployment: 7 tons, 2-pounder gun, maximum armor of 16 millimeters, crew of 3. It wasn't a battle tank designed to fight German Panthers or Tigers. It was reconnaissance and infantry support vehicle designed to provide airborne forces with mobile firepower and armor protection. The specifications seemed inadequate compared to standard tanks, but they were revolutionary for airborne forces who'd previously had no armored support whatsoever. The German intelligence failure. German military intelligence monitored Allied airborne development closely, tracking parachute units, glider designs, and doctrinal innovations. Intelligence reports noted British experiments with heavy gliders and discussed possible uses: artillery delivery, vehicle transport, supply operations. But German analysts never seriously considered that Britain might use gliders to deliver tanks. The reasoning seemed sound. Tanks were too heavy for practical air delivery. Even if transport was technically possible, the tactical value was questionable. Light tanks delivered by glider would be vulnerable to German armor and anti-tank weapons. Resources spent developing air-delivered armor would be better invested in conventional forces. The concept was dismissed as impractical and unlikely to be operationally significant even if attempted. This assessment was catastrophically wrong. German intelligence had analyzed the concept through lens of conventional warfare, where armor fought armor in decisive battles. They missed the operational context, where airborne armor would actually be used, not fighting German tanks, but supporting lightly armed paratroopers, attacking rear area targets, disrupting reinforcement routes, and creating psychological shock through sheer impossibility. The intelligence failure reflected broader German limitations in understanding British operational thinking. German doctrine was doctrinaire. Each force type had defined roles and capabilities. Paratroopers were light infantry. Tanks were heavy armor. These categories were distinct and shouldn't overlap. British approach was more flexible. If operational requirements demanded air-delivered armor, then develop air-delivered armor regardless of doctrinal conventions. The conceptual rigidity that made German doctrine efficient in conventional operations became liability when facing unconventional solutions to tactical problems. When reports began arriving on June 6th describing tanks emerging from gliders, German commanders initially dismissed them as confused observations from panicked troops. Tanks couldn't arrive by glider. This was known. Therefore, reports of glider-delivered tanks must be erroneous, perhaps misidentifying other vehicles or conflating separate observations. Even when photographic evidence and multiple consistent reports confirmed that British gliders were indeed delivering tanks, German commanders struggled to integrate this information into their understanding of tactical situation. The psychological impact of this intelligence failure was significant. If German intelligence had missed something so fundamental as air-delivered armor, what else had they missed? The uncertainty created by discovering that enemy possessed completely unexpected capability was corrosive to German confidence. If Britain could do the impossible by delivering tanks from the air, perhaps other impossible threats should be reconsidered. The D-Day employment. British airborne forces deployed 6 Tetrarch tanks via Hamilcar gliders during the opening hours of D-Day, landing them at strategic locations to support paratrooper operations and disrupt German defensive responses. The tanks were distributed across the operational area rather than concentrated, maximizing their psychological impact and geographic coverage. The first Hamilcar-delivered tank landed near Pegasus Bridge, where British airborne forces had seized the critical crossing point through coup de main assault. The tank provided armored support that transformed the paratroopers' tactical situation. Instead of being lightly armed infantry hoping to hold until relieved, they possessed mobile armored firepower that could engage German counterattack forces. When German troops attempted to recapture the bridge, they encountered not just paratroopers, but a tank that shouldn't have existed in that location. German forces at Pegasus Bridge had been preparing to retake the structure using infantry with artillery support, standard procedure for dealing with lightly armed airborne troops. The presence of British armor forced complete operational reassessment. Infantry assault without anti-tank support would be suicidal. Bringing up anti-tank guns required time and revealed German positions to Allied artillery. The tactical complexity of the situation increased enormously because of single tank that had arrived by glider. Another Tetrarch landed near Ranville, where it supported British paratroopers defending against German counterattacks. The tank engaged German infantry attempting to infiltrate paratrooper positions, using its machine guns and main gun to break up attacks that might otherwise have overrun lightly armed defenders. German troops reported confusion and demoralization at encountering armor in location where armor shouldn't exist. Paratroopers weren't supposed to have tanks, yet there was indisputably a British tank firing at them. A third tank was positioned to interdict a critical intersection on the main route from Caen to the coast. German reinforcements moving toward the beaches had to use this junction, making it high-value choke point. A single light tank couldn't hold the position indefinitely against determined attack, but it didn't need to. It only needed to delay German forces long enough for Allied beachhead to be established. The tank engaged German transport columns, destroyed several vehicles, and forced remaining German forces to find alternative routes, adding crucial hours to their response time. The tactical employment demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how limited resources could create outsized effects through strategic positioning. 6 tanks distributed across the operational area couldn't significantly affect the overall battle through firepower alone. They were too few and too lightly armed. But 6 tanks positioned at key locations where their presence was completely unexpected created disruption, delay, and psychological shock that multiplied their tactical impact far beyond their actual combat power. The German response. German forces encountering British airborne armor had no established procedures for dealing with the threat. Doctrine assumed that paratroopers had no heavy weapons beyond what could be parachuted in individual loads: light mortars, anti-tank rifles, minimal machine guns. The appearance of actual tanks forced German commanders to improvise responses without clear guidance. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber commanded a company assigned to clear British paratroopers from positions near Ranville. His briefing described the enemy as lightly armed airborne infantry who'd seized several buildings and were expected to defend until conventional forces relieved them. Weber planned standard clearing operation, suppress with mortars and machine guns, then assault with infantry. The operation should have been straightforward. Weber's assault stalled immediately when British tank opened fire from concealed position, destroying the lead section's position with several well-aimed shells. Weber's company took cover and tried to identify the threat. The presence of a tank was impossible. Intelligence had been explicit that British airborne forces lacked armor. Yet Weber could hear the tank's engine, could see its muzzle flashes, could observe the damage its fire was inflicting. Weber requested anti-tank support, but the nearest anti-tank guns were engaged elsewhere and couldn't be redeployed quickly. He attempted to maneuver infantry around the tank's position, but the terrain provided insufficient cover, and British paratroopers supported the tank with small arms fire. The assault that should have succeeded within an hour instead consumed the entire morning without achieving its objective. A single 7-ton tank had stopped a company of German infantry through combination of direct fire and psychological effect of its impossible presence. Weber's experience was repeated across the British airborne operational area. German commanders found their assumptions about enemy capabilities were wrong, their tactical planning was inadequate, and their responses were improvised. The psychological stress of this situation, discovering that your intelligence is false and your doctrine doesn't cover current reality, was significant. Soldiers can handle known threats through training and preparation. Unknown threats create uncertainty that degrades combat effectiveness beyond the physical danger they represent. The psychological warfare. The airborne tank's greatest impact was psychological rather than kinetic. 6 tanks couldn't change the overall battle through firepower. British forces deployed hundreds of conventional tanks on D-Day that had far greater combat power. But 6 tanks appearing where tanks shouldn't exist created psychological effects that hundreds of conventional tanks couldn't replicate. German soldiers encountering British airborne armor experienced cognitive dissonance that disrupted their tactical effectiveness. They'd been told paratroopers had light weapons, yet they were being engaged by tanks. This contradiction forced them to question what else their intelligence had gotten wrong. If the British could deliver tanks by air, perhaps they could deliver artillery, could deliver more tanks than reported, could deliver any equipment German intelligence claimed they lacked. This uncertainty was corrosive. Soldiers need confidence in their intelligence to function effectively. When intelligence is revealed to be fundamentally wrong, soldiers lose trust in information they receive and begin assuming worst-case scenarios. A German section encountering British paratroopers wouldn't know if those paratroopers had armored support nearby or not. The possibility that tanks might appear created hesitation and caution that reduced German aggressiveness. The psychological effect extended beyond immediate tactical situations. News of air-delivered tanks spread through German forces rapidly, creating second-order effects across units that never encountered the weapons directly. German soldiers who'd never seen an airborne tank knew that such things existed and might appear anywhere. This knowledge influenced how they approached combat with British forces, making them more cautious and less willing to exploit opportunities that might suddenly become traps if unexpected armor appeared. German commanders recognized this psychological dimension explicitly. Post-battle reports noted that airborne armor had created disproportionate disruption relative to their numbers and actual combat power. One report stated, "Enemy deployment of armor via glider represents psychological warfare success beyond tactical significance. Troops encountering this threat or learning of its existence experience uncertainty regarding enemy capabilities that affects combat decisions. Recommend acknowledging that enemy may possess capabilities not reflected in intelligence assessments and that tactical planning should assume presence of threats not explicitly confirmed." The final assessment. Britain's deployment of airborne tanks on D-Day succeeded not because the tanks were particularly effective as combat vehicles, they weren't, but because they created tactical and psychological effects that their modest capabilities didn't suggest were possible. 6 light tanks deployed at strategic locations disrupted German responses, forced tactical reassessments, and created uncertainty that spread far beyond their immediate operational area. Klaus Richter, who'd abandoned his roadblock position when a tank rolled out of a glider, was captured weeks later and interrogated about German defensive preparations. When asked about D-Day's most significant Allied capability, he didn't mention naval gunfire, air superiority, or numerical advantage. He mentioned the flying tanks. His explanation revealed the psychological dimension. Everything else we'd prepared for. We knew the Allies had ships, aircraft, armor, artillery. We had plans for dealing with all of it. But tanks from gliders? We had no plan for that because we believed it was impossible. When you discover the enemy can do what you believed was impossible, you start questioning everything. What else could they do? That uncertainty affected every decision we made afterward. The airborne tanks' tactical success was temporary. Most were destroyed or abandoned within days as German forces adapted and brought up adequate anti-tank weapons. But their psychological success was lasting. German forces in Normandy fought with knowledge that British capabilities exceeded German intelligence estimates in fundamental ways. This knowledge created caution and uncertainty that British forces exploited throughout the campaign. The engineering achievement of developing air-delivered armor deserved recognition independent of its tactical employment. British engineers had solved problems that German analysts had dismissed as insoluble, creating capabilities that shouldn't exist according to conventional understanding. The Hamilcar glider and Tetrarch tank individually weren't revolutionary, but the system they comprised, the ability to deliver armored vehicles by air with precision, represented genuine innovation in military capabilities. The lasting image from D-Day's early hours was German soldiers' face, watching a tank roll out of an aircraft. The impossibility of the sight, the cognitive dissonance between what should be possible and what was occurring, the immediate recognition that all assumptions about airborne capabilities were wrong. These psychological effects mattered more than the tank's actual firepower or armor protection. Britain had created a weapon that killed through impossibility, that defeated enemies by doing what they'd been taught couldn't be done. The Germans feared British flying tanks more than anything in Normandy, not because they were the most dangerous weapons deployed, they weren't, but because they represented the collapse of German understanding about British capabilities. If Britain could deliver tanks from the sky, what else could they do? That question, which no German commander could answer confidently after June 6th, was more powerful than the tanks themselves. Fear of the unknown is always stronger than fear of the understood, and British airborne armor made German forces fear that their understanding of British capabilities was fundamentally incomplete. The tanks that fell from the sky weren't heavy enough to fight German Panthers, weren't numerous enough to affect the overall battle significantly, and weren't sophisticated enough to revolutionize warfare. But they were impossible enough to be terrifying, unexpected enough to create chaos, and innovative enough to demonstrate that British military thinking was more flexible and creative than German intelligence had estimated. In war, creating uncertainty in enemy minds can be as valuable as destroying enemy forces, and Britain's flying tanks achieved both through the simple expedient of doing what Germans knew was impossible.